Welcome, Brian.
Welcome.
How are you today?
Doing well.
Great. I'm going to do a brief introduction. So, first of all, I did this last time. I am not a lawyer. This presentation by Brian is not meant to convey legal advice. He is available as a lawyer if you'd like to engage him, his law firm, or any other lawyer to get very specific advice that you follow with your agency and with your teams. This is a general presentation meant to share information, but don't take this as specific legal advice for your specific situation. All right, and with that, so it's all over the news, this mandatory vaccination, it's everywhere. And we did a survey of caregivers actually at the same agency that Vanette and Marcy are at. And I assumed that people would be against mandatory vaccination, but we found that about half of the caregivers surveyed, there were 111 caregivers surveyed, about half of them actually said they would get vaccinated if it was required. And that was surprising. So there is a role for mandatory vaccination. And luckily we have Brian Steinbach with us here to discuss that. So he is of counsel at the Labor and Employment Practice of Epstein, Becker, and Green in DC. He is, you can reach him, you see all this contact information on the screen, and we'll also receive it by email. But he's done everything as it relates to employment, labor, disabilities. Like, he has worked with healthcare related entities. He has litigated on issues related to labor. He's even litigated an arbitration issue before the Virginia Supreme Court. He's the man to go to. He knows a lot about this topic. Went to law school at UVA. He's on the National Labor Relations Board in DC. And
No. I'm not on the National Labor Relations Board. I worked for the National Labor Relations Board.
Oh, my bad. Okay, reframe. Works for the National Labor Relations Board in DC.
It's a nice promotion, but no.
And our favorite role for him is that he is the board counsel to MINCA. So we are very pleased that he's here to talk to us today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite Brian to add any additional pieces to your introduction, and then start to just share some high-level thoughts about the legal issues that are important for home care agencies to consider as it relates to vaccination, mandatory vaccination at this phase of the pandemic.
Sure. Well, I'll just jump right in with some highlights. The most important thing, I guess, is that you do have the right to require vaccinations. The EEOC itself confirmed this as something you can do, subject to reasonable accommodations of people with medical conditions or religious beliefs. And the Southern District of Texas, judge there, had very little trouble throwing out a lawsuit challenging Houston, the hospital in Houston Medical, requirement that people become vaccinated. The theory really on those who have tried to challenge these mandatory vaccinations has been around the fact that this is still under emergency authorization use. But the court said, yeah, technically that's true, but 150 million people have gotten this vaccine and it's shown to be safe and effective. I don't think so, and I think we can also anticipate probably pretty soon the Pfizer vaccine will get a full authorization. I know they said they were applying for it. I don't know if they've actually done it, but the data is so overwhelmingly positive that it's hard to believe that anything will help it and that it won't get approved. And the other thing now, most recently that's happened is OSHA came up with its emergency temporary standard, which strongly encourages vaccination, and in particular exempts from coverage of the standard if people are, at least in home health care, where employees are all fully vaccinated and non-employees are screened before entry, and people with suspected or confirmed COVID are not present. And screening is pretty minimal. That's asking the questions about fever and how you feel and that sort of thing that have been used for screening from the beginning, taking temperature. So, it's both something you can do, something you probably ultimately want to do. Uh, More and more employers are starting to require it now. They weren't earlier. On the other hand, given those pitfalls and the possibility still out there of at least somebody bringing a lawsuit, even if they aren't going to be successful, shouldn't be your first step. You should do everything you can to try to encourage it first. And then, maybe, in a month or two, you can always change to something more specific. And for example, some companies that are gradually starting to come back to work in their offices are saying, okay, effective September 1, everybody's going to have to be vaccinated. And we're seeing this in Wall Street. We're seeing this in some law firms. And I think, eventually that may be true at a lot of employers. But obviously, you've got the problem that if you're the one that's requiring vaccination and some other home healthcare agency isn't requiring it, that person might decide to go work over there, and you've lost an employee. So you may ask if somebody is vaccinated. It's not a protected class, but the information that you receive is going to be protected medical information. So you can't go sharing it out with others, and particularly concern is whether or not you can share that with your clients. The client can ask your caregiver, because they're not covered by HIPAA, of course. And you can if you do make it a requirement for everybody to be vaccinated, you acquire that information. You just don't send people out. But it's a tricky little area there. So let's see. You also, of course, can still require people to wear masks as before, and obviously in the home health situation, you have people who are at risk by definition. So you're going to want to continue to tell people if they're not vaccinated, they have to wear a mask. And if you want to just cover all the bases and say you have to wear a mask when you're servicing them, you could do that too. And you also have to be concerned about, obviously, the person, your client, perhaps being a carrier, having been exposed, and hurting your employees, much as in the hospital situation. Let's see. One other thing I want to mention about the OSHA standard is it essentially requires you to provide some time off and pay time off for getting the vaccine, and if there's a side effect, paying them for that time as well. So that's, of course, an incentive anyway, and there's many incentives that you can offer to people to get vaccinated. That's the simplest and easiest one, perhaps. Charlene, you got some questions you want me to answer?
No, that was actually great. I do have a quick question about the OSHA standard you just mentioned.
Right.
Does that mean that employers are they required by law to offer paid time off for an employee to get vaccinated? Did I understand that correctly? Or is that kind of just a guidance?
It's something, I guess. I think it's more at the level of, I think it's really a requirement, but they're certainly strongly encouraged.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fair.
I'd have to double check it, but let me take a look here. I think it is required, but let's see. Anyway, while I look, ask some questions.
Well, actually, why don't we open the floor to questions from participants? Does anyone who is in the audience have any questions for Brian about mandatory vaccination or other considerations as you are working with your teams around vaccination? Any questions? And you can either drop a note in the chat saying you have a question, or you can just unmute yourself and start talking.
I have a question.
Right.
What if a guardian asks about staffs? And let's say they say, I only want a vaccinated staff member to work with my child. How would we handle that? Not in the case of mandatory, because if it's mandatory, I'm speaking in a case that it's not mandatory.
Right. It's a very, unfortunately, complex situation because it's protected health information once you know it. And an argument can be made that if you send somebody after that question is made, you've revealed protected health information. I doubt that anybody's going to complain in that context because the person's getting the work. After all, they don't presumably don't have a problem with people knowing they're vaccinated because it's to their advantage. But your response to the client probably should be, we're not allowed to reveal vaccination status, but you are free to ask the person. Typically, don't they interview the person before taking them on?
For guardians, not necessarily, depending on the agency, but I know we do not.
Yeah. Well, the guardian is the person who is deciding who's going to be the caregiver, right?
No, they don't decide. Usually the agency hires the staff, but they, have rights and stuff over their loved one.
Right. Once the person's there, they can ask questions, I guess. Yeah, it's a tricky situation.
Thank you. I think you answered the question. I think
yeah. I mean, other part of the response is we're happy to require the person to wear a mask, if that's your concern.
So Brian, are you saying?
By the way, I found the answer. Yes, because vaccination is a tool to reduce the presence. The OSHA standard says you must support vaccination for each employee by providing reasonable time and paid leave for vaccination, any side effects for a reasonable time, whatever that may be, as you might wonder. And for those who want to track it, it's at 29 CFR 1910.502 parens M.
Okay.
But actually, I found it in the Q&A, and actually, there's a lot of stuff in the emergency standard that you probably want to take a look at in terms of compliance. There is an exemption, as I mentioned, for where your home health and everybody's vaccinated, so that's maybe encouragement. But there's reporting, and there's you got to keep a log and all the usual stuff. And while I'm not really an OSHA lawyer, so I won't go into the details of that stuff, but I encourage you to take a look at it. Charlene, did you put our advisory out there for people to have?
Yes.
And there's a summary of some of the stuff there, and there's also you can go to OSHA from there and look at the standard itself.
Right. So for those of you who received the email this morning, there's a hyperlink to the advisory that Brian is referring to in the section on legal considerations. But Brian, I want to clarify your answer to Melissa's question, just to be really clear. Are you saying if a client asks about says they want vaccinated caregivers and they ask about the vaccination status of a caregiver that you send them, or say only send me vaccinated caregivers, you as like the agency, the employer, cannot tell the client whether or not that caregiver is vaccinated, but the client can ask if they want to because they're not an employer. Is that, just to summarize, is that what you said?
Yeah, that's summary is what I'm saying, exactly.
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
Unless, of course, your person has, your employee has given you permission to reveal that information. Because it's protected medical information, but they're the one, it's their information, they're free to reveal it or not reveal it, or consent to being revealed. You should have that in writing, probably, so you can prove it later.
Is would asking for consent, could that be perceived as coercive because your work is contingent on giving consent?
Yeah, if you make it that way, yes. But if you make a general, do you have when because you're able to ask them if they've been vaccinated, and when they tell you that, you can ask, do you have a problem if we reveal your status? Because at this point, it's anybody. You ask that of vaccinated and unvaccinated people to clients, and if they say no and they sign something acknowledging that, I think that would fly. I haven't actually seen anybody say that, but it is not coercive because you're just asking them when you're asking everybody, you're not connecting it to anything or any particular job, and they've given their consent.
Okay.
So there's a chance that would fly.
All right, great. Thank you, Brian. Other questions from the audience?
Hi, it's Devon. I'm just trying to process that bit of information because that is one of the main challenges we are facing with staffing new clients. The ones that are not requiring interviews, but are requiring vaccinated caregivers. So, it's putting us in a tough spot because we don't have a large population of our caregivers that have been vaccinated. And the ones that are, I shared in the chat, are on active assignments already. So we can simply tell the clients, the new clients coming in, that we can't reveal that information, but we're happy to have them wear a mask, and that should work.
I think that's got to be your answer. Then, if the employee voluntarily reveals to the client that they're vaccinated, that they don't have to wear the mask anymore.
So it has
Although
to be
they want to wear the mask if the client isn't vaccinated.
I'll jump in there and just say that, just in general, that masks are still required in healthcare settings, regardless of vaccination status, just at this time.
Yes, we are still requiring our caregivers to wear masks, but it just that conversation around the vaccination and the status of the caregiver is where we are kind of hitting the wall, because we, at this point, if we can't staff, we're just telling the clients, unfortunately, we're having trouble finding you a caregiver that is vaccinated. But if we can omit that information going forward, I'm sure we will have, an easier way to go. But yes.
You're definitely been a rock and a hard place. And the OSHA standard says you don't have to have masks if you're in a home healthcare status situation. If you're vaccinated and anyone entering who is screened, but I don't have a problem with you continuing to require that in the healthcare situation. Certainly, generally, it's required. I guess the state probably is requiring it, and the state requires it. You got to follow that. OSHA standard makes it clear that it's not preempting anything. So, it's a complete rock and a hard place because this is what people want, and it's perhaps points to a good reason for requiring vaccination, because it's the only way you can service your clients properly.
Right.
To say we require everyone to be vaccinated at that point.
And you did say in the beginning that we can require it, correct? Companies.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you got to be reasonable in providing a certain period of time for people to comply.
Mhm.
But, but these days it doesn't take that long to comply.
Right.
Well, and to be fully vaccinated, you got to be is 2 weeks after either the second shot, if there is one, or after the first shot. So just because you had the shot, there's a 2-week waiting period for it to take effect and make sure there wasn't something already in there.
Right. Right. Okay. Thank you.
And that's why, OSHA put in you can provide other incentives beyond simply, the time off and to get it done. As long as they're not, well, if you're doing it yourself, which you're probably not, you got to be reasonable. But, if you want to give somebody a bonus for getting it, I mean, there's obviously, you only have so much money available to do that with, but there are things you can do to encourage it. And I know, Charlene, and one of the prior things you talked a lot about the incentives that some people were doing.
Yeah, like there are some employers are offering financial incentives, definitely paid time off. And then there are other employers, like for those of you who attended yesterday, there are other employers that are investing in efforts to, change hearts and minds about vaccination as well. And so,
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of it. Getting people to talk to each other about it. And I'm speaking to the choir here probably, but that it's not just protecting you, it's protecting other people, it's protecting your loved ones, the people you have contact with, all those things. There's this variant out there now that's much more contagious and much worse. But vaccine does protect against it. So get it now while you can.
Brian, what about medical exemptions? Like there are some people for whom either they have a reason not to get vaccinated, or they may have an immune condition that prevents the vaccine from working in them. How should employers consider those situations?
Just as accommodation, just as with any other accommodation with respect to the ADA, if there's an alternative protection, if mask wearing and distancing works, then distancing doesn't really work in home healthcare. And you can't set it up like a hospital room. It's not practical. But avoiding wearing gloves, wearing a mask, those kinds of things, may be sufficient. May depend on the client. There's a higher risk with some clients than others, deficient individuals versus just plain sick. Recovering in short-term care, recovering from surgery or something like that may not, is a different situation. But you can ask for, some evidence of the medical condition, unless you already know about it. But there's some exemption. The OSHA standard has exemption for pregnant women, although my understanding is that's it's questionable whether vaccine is a problem there, but nonetheless, I think that's something that's looked at. And then there's religious exemptions as well. So.
Okay. Thank you.
But I mean, when it comes back around to the requirement, remind people of all the requirements to get flu vaccinations. That's been out there for a long time, and certainly in the hospital situation. So it's nothing new to have required vaccinations.
Absolutely. Thank you. Are there other questions for Brian?
But yes, the conversations are very important because there's so much falsehood floating around out there on the internet that you can, what you can do to show that that's not true
Mhm.
It's not putting a chip in you. There's some pretty wild ones out there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. We are big fans of, of education and trying to debunk the myths that are out there about the vaccine. Do others have questions? These are great questions so far for Brian. Other questions or thoughts or just comments that you'd like to make while we have him here?
Cover.
Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen and actually ask. I actually planted some of the questions from the last time. So we had this one. So we have, I think you've covered this, but this was, we're doing a major push for vaccination. Would like to send out a letter saying that vaccination is required. If you aren't vaccinated, we understand, but your weekly hours may decrease. Is it okay to tell caregivers that choose not to get vaccinated once you make vaccination mandatory? Can you actually tell them they're not going to get as much work, or can you tell them that they won't get any work?
I like the may decrease. I think it's a good idea to say, we are open to reasonable accommodations for those who cannot take the vaccine for medical or religious reasons. We will consider, reasonable accommodations. So you're not cutting it out completely.
Okay, that's fair. The next question, this is the question that's already come up. It came up last time, it came up this time. It is a very popular question because
Yes.
every federal agency is getting questions from clients and prospective clients about the vaccination status of their caregivers. So it's not surprising that the two questions we've had so far really focused in on that.
Yeah, the home health care is sort of an outlier when they think about these rules. They, in a hospital setting, it's just not an issue.
Mhm.
But or for that matter, even in long-term care facilities, it's not really particularly an issue. But here, they don't really think through what the workplace is really like. I mean, the workplace is someone's home by definition. Well, almost always, because sometimes you're providing care in a assisted living facility, which is still a home, but it's a little bit different. But maybe they'll think of it, but EOC is always re-looking at these things, but there's unfortunately quite a time lag on it, and I think there's a strong reluctance to open any holes into that protected health is protected health situation, except where it's needed for care, and maybe that's the argument, that in order to provide the care, it's necessary to reveal it. But that's, you take a risk when you do that, and I'm not saying you got to make your own decisions there.
So the court case you mentioned in Texas, where the judge dismissed the lawsuit from a bunch of employees at Houston Methodist Hospital, does that mean that we're done with lawsuits and everyone is?
Oh no, by no means. And in fact, they're going to appeal that decision.
Okay.
And there are other lawsuits pending in other places. What it means is that there's a really good decision for the other judges to look at and consider, and I may reject some of the reasoning, and it may depend on the facility, but it's a great start. It's a real smackdown. It's kind of like the NCAA decision this week. You're in trouble now. And I saw some numbers today. I mean, the vast majority of the Houston facility, it's a huge operation. Something like 98% of these people have gotten vaccinated anyway. There's a few hundred that have chosen not to get it, and I mean, they had I guess they'd given everybody, put them on suspension for 2 weeks, give them time to get vaccinated if they hadn't, and that 2 weeks has expired now. So they're actually losing jobs. It'll be interesting to see how Texas unemployment handles those.
That is actually interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you receive vaccination and then lose your job and get unemployment?
Right. I mean, it's your own fault that you lost the job. It's not no fault of your own, unless of course you have a religious or medical reason for not getting it. So and Texas, I don't think is a state that probably hands out unemployment all that easily. Unlike some other states, like New York.
Very, very interesting. It's a really interesting time as we think about these issues and the challenges that employers are facing as they consider vaccination, as they consider mandatory vaccination. Brian's time with us is up, and so I just wanted to make one more offer. If you have a last-minute question for Brian before we let him get back to his law practice, this is your moment. We'll give it, a good 30 seconds, 20 to 20 seconds, and going, soon to be gone.
All right, well,
I think your answers were so clear.
sure. I'll just say, those of you who are MINCA members, some guidance gets posted there from time to time that I don't necessarily generate, but my colleagues do. So feel free to if you're not a MINCA member, you should become one.
Don's gonna love that plug.
Well, I got to do that for Don.
That's wonderful. Brian,
Right.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us and your time. We are grateful. Have a wonderful day as a labor and employment attorney, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Take care.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.